السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يعني يسعدني كثيرا الدعوة الكريمة وآسف جدا أن أنا اتأخرت، كان عندي التزام في القاهرة ولسه جاي من القاهرة من وقت قصير. كان نفسي أتشرف بوجودي معاكم من امبارح، وألف شكر دكتور علاء بيه على التقدمة. دكتور علاء أستاذنا، ويعني سعدت طبعا بلدياتي وبصحبته الكريمة، بالإضافة لما تعلمنا منه من علم يعني غزير، وربنا يخلي لي المنصة الكريمة. So good afternoon everybody. I'm going to talk about quite a different topic out of the box to take you somewhere where reproductive endocrinology. I'm basically not a gyne-oncologist, as you know, or you might know. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility subspecialist. So let me take you through some interesting and different topic, the biological clock from a gynecological perspective. So what makes a good presentation? As Winston Churchill said, it should not be too long or too short. I only have less than 14 minutes. So talking about reproductive clock, what's so interesting? Because a lot of genes have been expressed. They have a major impact on fertility, and they are currently a topic of active research. And last but not least, being an EFRI member, EFRI stands for the Egyptian Foundation for Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility and Embryology, it's a topic of great interest. So, a very interesting question. A woman comes asking, has my biological clock started ticking? Am I losing a greater part of my fertility as time advances? And as we all know that the process of attrition starts very rapidly, even when a baby is still in utero at the age of 20 or 24 weeks. This is when the attrition of the follicles, of the follicular pool, starts very early in life. Today we talk about evidence-based medicine, and very shortly we'll be talking about precision medicine, data mining, where every woman is treated on her own very own specifics and merits given her molecular and biological makeup. So every treatment is not only directed for, let's say, a woman having a certain disease, but rather a woman by her name and genetic makeup, biological and structural formulation. So what is chronobiology? Let me take you through this specific part of it. It's the biology related to the timing processes, cyclic biological events according to solar and lunar influences and rhythms. So what's called the biological rhythms? Chronobiology combines biology in relation to timing processes and under the influences of the solar, the sun, and lunar, the moon-related rhythms. So in chronobiology, it's not a unidisciplinary team, but it's rather a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary field, combining, as you might see, endocrinology, geriatrics, space medicine, sleep medicine, sports medicine, and last but not least, reproductive endocrinology. So what's chronomics? And we talk about proteomics, we talk about genomics. So what is meant by chronomics? Chronomics and chronome are used to describe the molecular mechanisms which are involved in this chronobiological events. So chronomics and chronome refer to molecular mechanisms and chronobiological processes in a very quantitative pattern of spread. So let's have a look at the human circadian rhythm, the biological clock. We all know that, for instance, melatonin starts to be secreted at about 21 o'clock, 9 in the evening, reaching the highest level very early in the morning. And we all know this circadian pattern of hormonal influences which govern reproductive performances. In chronobiology research, there has been some light shed on light and melatonin and the various types of chronotypes, circadian disruptors. This is a common term in chronobiology. Mealtime, jet lags, shift workers, all those influences negatively affect the very delicately organized circadian rhythms, and therefore they are termed circadian disruptors. And also we have modulators of circadian rhythms. And those modulators which act in a negative way render this delicate mechanism, the functions of the cells are out of sync. And we always hear as gynecologists, out of phase endometrium, out of structure, cellular, atypia, and so on. But here we improvise a new terminology where cells are out of sync. They don't work in synchrony. So we have this typical, the phase response curves, which are used in chronobiological research. If you happen to see one of those, this is what it's used. Now, we were always taught as we have the central circadian pacemaker, which is the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, and this is what governs the whole reproductive axis, the hypothalamo-pituitary-ovarian axis. So what's new in the field now? Unraveling much of the molecular mechanisms and the entire genomes have come to important conclusions that we have a central pacemaker, but we also have peripheral clocks or timekeepers. So a feminine body does not only have a central pacemaker when it comes to reproductive functions, but there are also a number of peripheral clocks which work in synchrony with the central one. Here again, clock genes control the circadian rhythms, and those in turn are influenced by hormonal secretions, sympathetic innervations, body temperature, feeding patterns, psyche, and the activity rhythms. The regulation of clock genes is a very complex pattern involving many types of receptors, not only those of hormone receptors, of course. Top of the list are glucocorticoids, thyroid, and estrogen, as well as proteins for signaling. Many aspects of reproductive functions are strongly circadian. Autonomous rhythmicity in reproductive structures has only recently been explored. That is to say, we all know that the uterus has an autonomous intrinsic myometrial activity. Here again, the peripheral clocks do indeed have this a good deal of autonomous activity. So there has been a paradigm shift. In ovulation is a synchronized process, circadian oscillator way in the hypothalamus. However, the neurons, pituitary cells, and the ovary have their own autonomous control in ovarian activity. So now we talk about the multi-oscillator control of the hypothalamo-pituitary-ovarian axis. And this is the old type of teaching, the classical, where the mechanism is known to everyone. But here again, the revised model shows you that there is a central nucleus at the hypothalamus, but we also have a number of peripheral nuclei which act very efficiently to influence the circadian rhythm at the level of the pituitary, ovary, influencing ovulation. So, we all know what homeostasis stands for. It stands for constancy of whatever an internal environment in the human body is there. Now we talk about rheostasis. Is there a difference? Yes, of course. Homeostasis is constancy, regulation in something that is constant. Rheostasis is regulation in something that has a rhythm. Let me tell you something. Now, I'm standing like in a constant way, but if I'm standing like this in a constant way, and every couple of seconds I tend to raise my toes a little bit like that. So I have a circadian, there is a rhythm. So this is rheostasis. So if you ever hear the term, you know what it stands for. So it's a rhythmic, steady pattern. Now, so the clock is in the ovary. We all know that, the molecular ovarian clock, where the genes are not only expressed preferably centrally at the hypothalamus, but also at the granulosa cells. So normal reproductive physiology depends on coordination within and between the various circadian clocks. And if something goes wrong, you end up with desynchronization, which has a number of negative impacts on reproductive functions, not to mention altered menstrual cycles, increased menstrual pain or dysmenorrhea, changes in FS secretion, low birth weight, and increased incidence of miscarriage. Like PCOS, may also result from desynchronization of those peripheral clocks. So here again, we talk about rheostasis controlling hypothalamo-pituitary-ovarian axis. So now let me take you through, this is a recent publication, tells you that night shift workers do have more manifest PCOS-like symptoms. And this tells you that it came to the conclusion that let there be light. So if women are exposed more to light, melatonin homeostasis is influenced in a positive way to impact polycystic ovary syndrome. Because of women who have night shifts, nurses, night workers do have a greater impact of PCOS. So this is the conclusion here, is that in this issue, they tried to assess the association, and they came to the conclusion that there was a significant change for night shift workers who had worked in rotation rather than fixed night shifts. So the conclusion was women should have more light, should be exposed to more light to ensure that the reproductive functions are in order. So there might not just be one reproductive pacemaker at the hypothalamus. We also have a number of others at the level of the pituitary, at the level of the ovaries, at the level of the uterus, and last but not least, at the level of even the uterine tubes. So we don't have just one reproductive maestro. We do have a number of maestros, each of whom works in very perfect coordination, has his own or her own rhythm, but under the central control of the big maestro. So every one of those subtle or subordinate maestros enjoys a great deal of activity, all governed by the central maestro. So we've just unraveled the tip of the iceberg and digging for evidence in tasks. This is not a technical failure. This is not a power failure. This is not an error. It only tells you that in darkness, it's very easy to miss a step. Beware that we only know a very small fraction of what's there. So health is a state of perfect subatomic communication. And ill health is a state when communication breaks down. Let me tell you that those words are not written by a physician or a gynecologist. This is a famous writer, Lynn McTaggart. She's a famous writer who is not a gynecologist. And see how well the phrase applies even to biology, to medicine, or gynecology. And she states very nicely that we become ill when our waves are out of sync. Here again, she described the word out of sync. So, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, my take-home message as far as the biological reproductive clock is that we do indeed have a central pacemaker way in the hypothalamus. It is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. But it works not independently or solely, but it works in liaison with other peripheral pacemakers, oscillators, so we have multi-oscillatory rather than uni-oscillatory controls. And this mechanism is all governed by the presence of clock genes, which help keep synchrony and help keep rheostasis. Thank you very much.